Hey guys, so last week I came on here and I talked a little bit about how it's important that we all soberly reflect on the results of the 2024 US election, which showed that an alarming majority of Americans don't actually care enough about women, LGBTQ people, immigrants, or democracy to come out and vote against Donald Trump. Because, from my perspective, we can't move forward in a positive way until we accept and understand that that is what happened. I'd like to apologize for that video because it turns out that that didn't actually happen. The election was stolen, just like in 2020, but in a different liberal way. Like the right-wingers who said the election was stolen in 2020 are insane, but this time, the election was actually stolen. I talk about conspiracy theories a lot on here, and up until this year, it was pretty much only about the conspiracy theories that went around right-wing circles. Thanks to movements like QAnon and prominent right-wing entertainers and politicians who helped them, these conspiracy theories tended to spread very quickly and have a big impact on our society. But this year, I noticed an unfortunate change. As I said back in July, I started to notice that my social media feeds were beginning to be filled with liberal conspiracy theories, particularly that Donald Trump had somehow faked an armed man shooting a real bullet at him and killing someone in the audience behind him. I was shocked that anyone would believe that, and even more shocked that even after I posted an explanation of why that made no sense, liberals kept arguing with me that it must have happened that way because reasons. In that video, I said, I suspect this liberal dive into territory formerly dominated by the far right is due to similar reasons the far right went there in the first place. They fell into an echo chamber, saw an existential threat coming, and they got scared. With that in mind, let's talk about the latest blue anon conspiracy theory. Trump did not actually win the 2024 election. Donald Trump and his cronies, including Elon Musk, hacked the 2024 election. My social media feeds have been flooded with this idea. I've seen it all over Blue Sky, and apparently Threads is absolutely infested with it. It seems to go back to a man named Steven Spoonamore, who has a Substack where he posted a letter to Kamala Harris urging her to rescind her concession and order a recount, because in his capacity as the CEO or CTO at 7 high-technology firms, including 2 which specialized in hacking and counter-hacking operations, he believes he has found multiple and extremely clear indications the presidential vote was willfully compromised. As evidence, he points out that there were a large number of ballots, he says 600,000, that only voted for Donald Trump and no down ballot voting on other races. He refers to these as bullet ballots, which was a little confusing to me at first because I've only ever heard that term as it applies to ranked choice voting, in which a voter is allowed to choose several candidates in the order they prefer them, but a bullet ballot is when a voter simply chooses one candidate and ignores the other. Voting for a president and no other office on the ballot is usually called undervoting, and it's extremely common in the United States to the point where every election, people on both sides of the aisle beg voters to learn about their down ballot choices. And every midterm, we beg people to just please turn up even though there is no presidential election. If you don't believe me, you can go to the Federal Election Committee's website and download the election results from any prior election. In 2016, you can see that 136,669,276 people voted for president, but only 131,652,458 voted for a member of the House, which all voters had an opportunity to choose, which is a difference of more than 5 million people. But Spoonamore is concerned with 600,000 that only voted for Trump. And by the way, that is the only way to really guess at whether or not a person only voted for a president without seeing the actual ballots. You compare the number of people in a state who voted for the president and contrast it with the number who voted for another race. When comparing between states, it's helpful to choose the House as the under ballot because not everybody gets to vote for a senator for every presidential race. No matter who you're choosing to compare that number to, there's no way to tell if that ballot really was only for a president, or if they voted for a president and a judge and a dog catcher, but not the congressional candidate, for instance. Spoonemore further claims that these undervotes are disproportionately high in swing states, but for a start, he wrote his second and thus far final letter to Kamala Harris on November 12th before all the votes had been tabulated. And further, again, he doesn't know this. All he can do is compare how many votes each candidate got in a particular state with how many votes someone else got down ballot, which tells you precisely nothing in this context. He tacitly admits that in an Ask Me Anything that he did on Reddit this week, in which someone point blank asked him if he has access to the 2024 cast vote records and ballot images, and if not, how can he be so confident in his figures? He replies by agreeing that, yeah, it's impossible for him to know that without that information, but then he dodges the question of how he got his numbers anyway. And that's it. That's the evidence that Trump stole the election. Everything else in his letter is a fantasy he made up to explain how Trump and Elon Musk may have stolen this election. To avoid accusations of poisoning the well, I wanted to lead with all of that information before I tell you that the very first thing I did before I even read this guy's Substack was Google him to see if he was even worth listening to. And despite how much AI has ruined internet searches, I have to give props to Google for giving me this PDF on the very first page. A declaration of Stephen Spoonemore written on October 26th of 2008, and which begins, during the evening and early morning on the 2004 general election in Ohio, on my own computer I was watching the results of incoming counties and precincts. I believe there was a more than likely chance county tabulators had been programmed to manipulate votes. I had a simple Microsoft Excel program running to help with the analysis. As early results showed Kerry ahead at about 11 p.m., I noticed a trend in a very few counties. I believe I noted 8 counties on election night that at about 11 p.m. suddenly began reporting radically different ratios of Kerry to Bush votes, all in favor of Mr. Bush. Need I go on? This lifelong Republican, as he stated in his letter to Kamala Harris, has previously campaigned to reverse the 2004 election in which George W. Bush beat John Kerry. The year that Bush won even the popular vote, by the way, not the year he actually stole an election in Florida, not Ohio. The lifelong Republican was also briefly prevented from running as an independent for Ohio state representative in 2016 because he had previously voted as a Democrat in primaries. The key takeaway here, though, is that Stephen Spoonemore appears to be a hammer and every election he doesn't like appears to be a nail. It's a shame because the right wing really does try to steal elections. And as I said, in 2000, they succeeded. If you weren't around then, George W. Bush ran a close race with Al Gore. It all came down to Florida, where the ballots were terribly designed. They were very confusing. And also they utilized a punch-out system. And they decided to discard votes if the hole wasn't cleanly punched, even if it was obvious who the vote was for. They started to do a recount, but the conservative Supreme Court stopped it and gave the electoral votes to Bush. Historians seem to think that had they done a full recount in the entire state, then yeah, Gore would have won and we would be on a completely different timeline right now. And that's the thing. The Republicans don't need a complicated conspiracy to steal an election. They've been doing it for years by using loopholes, by setting up institutions like the Electoral College and even the Senate and the Supreme Court to get a disproportionate number of votes. They gerrymander, they intimidate, they spread disinformation. I'd love it if we could just focus on that stuff one day. Over the coming months, officials in every county will be going over the results to certify that the election was fair, or as fair as our elections get these days. If that includes some hand counting of ballots, I am all for it. If someone wants to file a lawsuit to force the hand counting of ballots, I'm all for that too. Election transparency is good, even if it tells us something we desperately don't want to hear, like Donald Trump won the 2024 election. I'll admit when I first saw all these posts on social media about an expert saying he had hard evidence of election fraud, and I didn't see a single person present any argument against it, I did get that little zing of happiness, like, holy shit, maybe we can reestablish women's rights. Maybe we won't lose gay and trans rights. Maybe we can continue to work towards our climate goals. Maybe this was all a bad dream. But that desire for everything to be okay, or at least to have a solid villain to fight and a known framework in which to fight him, is exactly what drives most, if not all, conspiracy theories to one extent or another. It would be so much easier to be able to just rally behind the Democrats as they uncover this elaborate fraud and retake the government. Much easier than fighting to educate people and stop misinformation and grab people by the shoulders and shake them until they start caring about their neighbors. But we can't win through fantasy. We can only win through acceptance and then action. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you loved the video, please subscribe. And if you think the world could use more videos like this and you happen to have a few bucks laying around, head to patreon.com/Rebecca and join an awesome community of nerds like the people whose names you see on the screen right now. Thanks.